My name is Ana Matronic, and as Anne said, you might know me as the lone lady from the band Scissor Sisters, or if you are a fan of 1970s dance music, perhaps you have tuned in to my show Disco Devotion on BBC Radio 2, which is every Saturday. Shameless plug. But the reason I'm here today is to actually talk to you about my love of robots, and in particular, the stories we tell about them. So I'm very into audience participation. If any of you have been to a scissors show, you might know that. So I'm gonna start this with a show of hands. If you can raise your hand. If you work in STEM, and that means even if you write about it, or you use it somehow, technology, somehow you are adjacent to it. Okay, great. So keep those hands up. I want to ask another question. Of those people whose hands are up, how many of you as children devoured sci-fi, whether it was video games or comic books or film or TV? Raise your other hand. Hi. Now look around the room and wave at your fellow geeks. Hi. I am also one of them. I technically don't work in STEM, although I'm STEM adjacent, but I do count amongst these geeks, because I, Ana Matronic, would not be Ana Matronic without my love of sci-fi, and I would not be here today if I were not an incurable and incorrigible robophile. And I believe that the stories that we tell as children continue to manifest in our lives as adults. I would not be here without science fiction, and I wouldn't be here without these stories. And if my name has not given you the idea, I love robots so much. I love thinking about them. I love listening to them. I love watching them. I love writing about them, and I wrote this book a couple years ago on the 100 greatest robots of all time, both ones that we have imagined and ones that we've realized in real life. And I've been asked many times since the book's release, why do I love robots and where this love comes from? And I find this to be a difficult question sometimes, because my love of robots has been with me and has been so intrinsic since really before I can remember. So, it started with these two. I was not yet 3 years old when the first Star Wars film came out, and R2-D2 and C-3PO were my first robot friends, and they are the jump start to my love of all things AI. I mean, who doesn't love R2-D2, right? He's the world's most recognizable, well-loved, not lingual, but somehow everybody can magically understand him, has every tool for the job, and then some robot. Now, C-3PO was not as universally loved, unless you're an Ewok. A lot of people call him the world's most annoying robot, but that's not true. I loved him because he reminded me of my dad. Gay, persnickety, all about protocol, loved shiny things. That was my dad. So immediately, robots were both fascinating and familiar to me. And the same thing with this guy, Tweaky from Buck Rogers. He was, like a cute life-size doll. He was probably about the same height that I was at the time when I was watching it. And he also had the benefit of having the same voice as my favorite cartoon characters, Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Mel Blanc, of course, the legendary voiceover actor, was the voice behind Buck Rogers' wise-cracking sidekick. So fascinating and familiar. Then there were the bad guys. The Cylons, the disco love children of C-3PO and the Stormtroopers. That is it, that highly polished chrome, the LED, the swoosh sound of the visor, their vocoder voices, the fact that they only seem to exist in low light with a star filter, ping, 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 going off their armor. Loved them. That is what made me an industrial design obsessed magpie, right there. And then there were the cyborgs. Steve Austin and Jamie Summers, the $6 million man and the Bionic Woman, just like us, but better, stronger, faster. And they showed me that robots weren't just something that existed outside of you. They could be in you, and that with technology, we could ourselves become better, stronger, faster, a better version of ourselves. I had loved them as a kid and played with my dolls and, woo, how can I jump in slow motion? I didn't realize then just how much they would influence me, and particularly, she would influence me later in life. So this is to give you an idea of my childhood and the robots and AI that were in my childhood. And as I grew, and the 70s segued into the poppin' and lockin' 80s, they never really seemed to go away. In the 80s, we started doing the robot to Grandmaster Flash, and our homes welcomed our first computers or our first video game consoles. And then that, of course, segued into the 90s, when the word cyber entered our consciousness. And the notion of bionic people didn't really seem that crazy or far-fetched. And it was in the 90s when I was in college studying anthropology and sociology that, and on the side, of course, developing a heavy fascination with 70s pop culture. And it was around this time that, living on my own for the first time, the Sci-Fi Channel started airing reruns of The Bionic Woman. And I was reunited with my childhood heroine, Jamie Summers. And the nostalgia of the 70s mixed with the fascination, and soon I started watching The Bionic Woman religiously, and I do mean religiously. And it was something about the fashion, how everything was dark wood paneled, the important phone was in a box, and computers were room size with reel-to-reels and flashing lights. Boo, 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 thank you, supercomputer. I was hooked. There was something about it that just really, really got me. And that next term, I started scheduling my classes around The Bionic Woman. And if I couldn't miss a class, I would tape the episodes. And not too long after that, The Bionic Woman inspired my first ever robotic writing project, which was a zine called OSI Magazine. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a zine is, it's what people did before websites and Tumblr. They were self-published magazines, usually about some aspect of pop culture. I dated a guy who had a zine about monorails. Mine was about the Bionic Woman. And I had just studied Joseph Campbell and the notion of the hero's journey in school. And I applied this, the notion of the hero's journey, onto Jamie Summers and made her a muse and messiah for my 21st century technologically based religion called Bionic Love. I told you I watched it religiously. And my religion playfully painted the caring and compassionate Miss Summers as the sort of muse and messiah. She's the union of opposing forces of science and nature. She's the embodiment of the future and a herald of the coming technological age, and a reminder to never lose your humanity in the face of it. And I painted each episode as a study into a greater state of being, and I encouraged my readers to watch and emulate our bionic heroine in an effort to become spiritually bionic. But even then, back in the early 90s, before I had even heard the word transhuman, I believed in technology, and I believed that technology was not something to be feared, but something to be utilized to take humanity to the next level of existence, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Any converts? Anybody want to know more? Yeah, I didn't have many back then either. But it was in Portland. I started performing at a place called the Paris Theater, and it's downtown near the Burnside Bridge, and a drag queen by the name of Betty Bomber maxed out all of her credit cards to secure the lease. And she put together a troupe of drag queens and real women called the Paris Girls, and we did regular shows. And this is where my love of theater and music and dress up all came together in this beautiful art of drag and burlesque. And I was a member of the show, and because of my prowess on a microphone, I became the MC. And for Halloween that year, I decided to dress up as a robot. Shocking, I know. And I was doing a number for our Halloween show, and I was describing my movements to my friend Michael, And I was saying, oh, I kind of want to do, this sort of like malfunctioning Ana Matronic mannequin. And as soon as the word Ana Matronic came out of my mouth, we both looked at each other and we said, oh my God, Ana Matronic. And that is how Ana Matronic, that's how Ana Lynch became Ana Matronic, the greater, stronger, faster, 21st century drag queen superheroine version of myself that stands before you today. Thank you. Well, Paris theater didn't last long, but my relationship to drag and my friendship with Michael did. We moved to San Francisco together, the pansexual, cyberpunk San Francisco of the mid-1990s. And we found a home amongst an amazing and incredible group of performers and artists at a drag club called Tranny Shack, which happened every Tuesday at a bar called The Stud. And it was there that I learned how glamour and performance can be utilized not only as a fun and frivolous way to get your rocks off on stage, but also as a way to comment on gender and society, and as a tool for self-realization and for transformation. The drag club is, for many transgendered people, the first public step in embodying their true selves. And T-Shack provides a safe space for everyone to explore their own sexuality, their own gender expression, and I reveled in it. In turning myself into somebody else, in realizing a life for a night that wasn't my own, or living my own creation for a night. Drag helped express the multitudes within me. And I created other people, avatars, IRL, and they helped me create myself. And it was in San Francisco, and this was a time before the new millennium, when the tech bubble was just beginning to form, where words like biohacking and designer genetics were just starting to enter our conversations. And what seemed like the stuff of fiction in my childhood was, in fact, becoming fact. And the idea that bionic people really could be people I know, or that I could be, was becoming real. And it was in San Francisco that I was introduced to the work of a very influential writer, not one of science fiction. And she told me I didn't have to wait to be a cyborg. I already was one. For those of you unfamiliar, let me introduce you to Donna Haraway. Here's her title. She is a distinguished professor emerita in the History of Consciousness Department at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She's the author of several groundbreaking treatises, and many on humankind's relationship to machines. And she wrote one that confirmed my deification of the Bionic Woman and transformed my love of robots into something more. Haraway makes the argument that you don't need bionic limbs to be a cyborg. Anybody benefiting from science or technology to enhance their body's natural processes already is one. If you have a vaccination, congratulations, you have just tapped into science to change your body's immune system. If you've got comfortable shoes on, that technology allows you to walk much farther than you were barefoot. Congratulations, you are a cyborg. So fittingly, in the year 1984, Haraway wrote a piece called A Cyborg Manifesto, and she makes this statement in it. By the late 20th century, our time, a mythic time, we are all chimeras, theorized and fabricated hybrids of machine and organism. In short, we are cyborgs. The cyborg gives us our ontology. It gives us our politics. The cyborg is a condensed image of both imagination and material reality, the two joined centers structuring any possibility of historical transformation. In the traditions of Western science and politics, the relation between organism and machine has been a border war. The stakes of the border war have been the territories of production, reproduction, and imagination. A Cyborg Manifesto is an argument for pleasure in the confusion of boundaries and the responsibility for their construction. It is also an effort to contribute to socialist feminist culture and theory in a postmodernist, non-naturalist mode, and in the utopian tradition of imagining a world without gender, which perhaps is a world without genesis, but maybe also a world without end. And if ever is an argument for pleasure in the confusion of boundaries and responsibility in their construction. I put this up there because so you could see what's italicized. If ever there was a motto for House Matronic, it would be pleasure in the confusion of boundaries. So I finally found in academia the ideas I was sort of stabbing at with my love of the Bionic Woman. That with technology, we can push back against the boundaries imposed upon us and make ourselves greater. That we can take an active part in our evolution, to the evolution of our bodies, the evolution of our minds, that we can understand our minds and take responsibility in the creations of new definitions of being. Donna Haraway opened the door to a path of social theory that felt like the sci-fi I grew up reading. And that, of course, led me to a new word. Woo, I'm supposed to go back. And that word is transhuman. This is where my paths intersect. This is where my love of robots and cyborgs, drag queens and androgynes, tech and sci-fi, reality and fantasy come together in one massive, boundary-shattering field of theory, scientific application, and philosophy. This is where the bionic people become real. This is the one word that best sums up both my belief in the future and my belief in human potential. It's where the science fiction of William Gibson, where people can exist as a flatline construct, where the person has died but their consciousness continues on. This work is actually being worked on with brain emulation software by Martine Rothblatt and Randall Cooney. And these may be the people that allow us to upload our minds onto digital brain emulation software long after our physical bodies have given out. And this is really being worked on. This is not an episode of Black Mirror, although actually it was an episode of Black Mirror as well. It's real. And that's what sets robots apart from all other aspects of science fiction, because unlike space travel, which is possible but only for the elite few, unlike alternate dimensions or time travel, robots are here and they're real. Right? You laugh, but they are. And we are interacting with artificial intelligence more and more on a day-to-day basis. And this is only going to continue to grow. And robots confuse the boundaries. They confuse the boundaries between life and death, human and machine, male and female, master and servant, thinking and feeling, ability and disability, creation and destruction. I take pleasure in the confusion of all of these boundaries. I do. And as an artist, I have a unique platform to share and study these stories. And as a transhumanist, I take responsibility in this examination and the construction of new boundaries. These are boundaries that expand the very definition of personhood. Martine Rothblatt, who is herself transgendered and working on this brain emulation software, tells us that if we believe in the rights of transgendered people, which I very much do, that it's not a huge leap at all to become a transhumanist. She has an essay in which she writes that freedom of gender is a gateway to freedom of form and to an explosion of human potential. First comes the realization that we are not limited by our sexual anatomy. Then comes the awakening that we are not limited by anatomy at all. The mind is the substance of humanity. Mind is deeper than matter. And that's the name of her essay, by the way. If you want to read the whole thing, I highly recommend it. She also goes on to say that human identity is limitless in variety, and it's detachable from reproduction. If you can accept that a person without a penis can peaceably live life as they please, including as a man, then you should be able to accept that a person without physical form can peaceably live life as they please, including as a human. Can you accept that someone is not automatically passive or evil or dumb simply because they have a vagina instead of a penis? Then you should be able to accept that someone is not automatically passive or evil or dumb simply because they have a software mind instead of a flesh-based one. Personhood is about equity, not equipment. Talk about the formation of new boundaries. I mean, that's just shattering to many. And so I believe that we have an examination to look at the stories that we tell about robots and examine the spaces that robots occupy in our storytelling before they start occupying spaces in our society. We have an opportunity in this moment to be prepared for the arrival of mechanical and digital people. And I believe it's our responsibility to be prepared. When robots do occupy space in our society, when robot rights and robosexuality is not something that's spoken about in an episode of Futurama or in The Matrix or in a lofty transhumanist essay, when it's actually here, we will be forced as humans to take a look around and examine how well we have done with the rights of our fellow humans. And if we don't do that before the robo demonstrations start, we are going to have problems, and not just with the robots. So this coming AI revolution provides us an opportunity and a responsibility to recognize and address the inequalities that exist on our planet, and to use our technology with the best intentions, to allow us, in the process of becoming more bionic, to actually become more human. Otherwise, what reason do we give the robots not to take over? I mean, we've got some kind of weird, faulty wiring and some messed up programming that could definitely use some updating. And I think the reality of robots provides us an opportunity to reboot our operating system in every sense. Do I sound like a cyborg? It's because I am one, and so are you, everybody in this room. Technology defines our world and constantly recontextualizes our existence. And it is about to redefine who we are and who we consider to be a person. And everybody with their hands up at the beginning of the talk, those are the hands that shape the future to come. Those are the hands that will turn the science fiction of our childhoods into the shared reality of everyday life. Just imagine in the future where I'm sitting around in my robot body, because it's like 100 years from now, I will still be alive in some way. And we're sitting around with our real robot friends, maybe around a real fire, maybe around a digital one. But imagine what those stories are going to look like.